Welcome, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Office Hours with Educators Without Borders. Hey, guys, how are you four doing? Three. Can I not count?
Doing well, doing well. How are you?
Very well,
I'm
Tracy.
great. I'm great.
Hey,
Listen,
everybody.
have you ever wanted to start a podcast? Have you ever thought, man, I want to do it. I don't know how to do it. I don't know where to start. Well, that's why we're here. We're going to peel back the layers. We're going to share tips, tricks, oops, ahas. Hopefully, by the time we finish tonight, you'll be ready to start. So speaking of starting, I want to start with introducing our guest host, our good friend, Charles Williams. Hey, Charles, how are you tonight?
Doing well, Tracy, doing well. So happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
We're glad to have you. And since we're starting with you, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about your podcast, and then we're just going to flow around the room and we'll all share about our podcast.
Absolutely. So the Counter Narrative podcast is something that I designed just to really push back against the dominant narrative, often against our most disenfranchised students, right? There are some amazing work out there, but oftentimes in education, we only hear the bad, right? All the negative things about these populations. So I wanted to highlight those amazing stories and really starting to change the way we talk and think about education.
Changing the narrative. I love that. Thank you for sharing. So everybody make sure you download and subscribe to Charles's Counter Narrative podcast. All right, up next, Pav, why don't you tell us a little bit about the two of you, your podcast, and a little bit about yourself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Pawan, and I am half of the Staff Room podcast and The Drive on Voice Ed Radio. So the Staff Room podcast was started by myself and Chey, who is here right next to me. And we started about 15 months ago as a way to reflect on our teaching. And so at the end of every week, we spent a little bit of time talking about what we were teaching and how we were teaching and what went right, what went wrong, and where to go from there. And so it was a very reflective beginning, and it continues to be very reflective. But now we reflect a lot more on our pedagogies and other new pedagogies that we come across daily. And we get a great opportunity to talk about those every week.
You're really, really inspiring me and have been such a great role model. And I just love going on this journey with all of you. Let's switch over to Chey, the other half. So, hey, Chey, what's up? Tell us a little bit, add some spice to what she said. I know you're going to bring it.
And if we're talking half, you mean 3% of the Staff Room podcast in The Drive.
I knew you were going to pick up on that. I was waiting.
Pav delivers the content, Pav delivers the insight, and Jim Guy just fills in the little spots here or there to entertain. But I would add on to Pav, as we're talking about podcasting in general, our podcast and our mission is sort of evolved as we've refined our skill, refined our craft. And although we started very reflective and sort of self-assessment of our teaching, and that made us better, it started to progress as then we wanted to share really great lessons, and then we wanted to explore really great lessons. And our podcast has shifted to not only just reflecting, but also reflecting and showing and sharing, and thus still building our capacity as teachers. And I think when we think about podcasting, what's the target, what's the goal, or what's the measurable factor? Well, if it's still impacting our teaching and bringing zest to our job and our profession, then that's the target we want to hit. And we've been hitting it, and we're going to keep trying to hit that target.
Absolutely. You make us think, you stretch us, you grow us. I love listening to you guys. You vibe so wonderfully. And speaking of vibing, let me tell you really, really quick about my vibe. My podcast is Intelligogy The Podcast. It's, gosh, I love it. It's everything education. It's about the heart. It's about passion. And I could just stop right there. It's really about the passion and falling in love with why we do what we do, and it's for the kids. So that being said, let's go ahead and take a look at our first question, which comes from Zachary Rodriguez, a third grade teacher who's thinking about starting his own podcast. Let's listen to what he has to ask us, and then we'll come back on the other side and dive in.
So I wanted to start a podcast and have a general idea of the topic I wanted to address in the format for the show, but what's next? Like, how do I move from concept to production and creating content? And the information available on the host and the platform is a little overwhelming. I need help.
Well, that's a loaded question. Are we ready to dig in? So, how about we start with Charles? Charles, what do you have to say about figuring out your format? How did you do that?
To be honest, I'll give a lot of credit to my friends down below me here at the staff room, right? I was listening to them, had ideas about starting a podcast, and that's really how I got my ideas. I just started listening to a bunch of different podcasts, figuring out what worked, what didn't work, what vibed with me, what didn't vibe with me, and really used all that together and really just reached out to those who I considered experts, trying to figure out what platforms did they use. So I use a website called Anchor. I use Zencaster to do my recording, but I did that because I figured that out just simply by reaching around, asking individuals and saying, hey, what do you do? I love your sound, right? And so I would recommend starting there, right? Just find some podcasts that fit you, that resemble what it is that you're trying to do, and then just start asking questions and grow from there.
You know, if I could count, I think we've said the word vibe like 5 times tonight. And I think that's really what it's all about, is vibing with others, finding your own vibe. So speaking of vibes, Chey, what do you have to add to that? What about format? How do you figure it out?
I look over to my partner, the 98% stock shareholder in this podcast. I say, what do we do next? When I think about where do you move forward to, or where are you going to, there's a couple of things you got to ponder. And if you're just thinking about the physicality of recording your podcast, Charles highlighted that great software, but like what physical pieces, what hardware pieces do you have that's going to let you sort of build your sound? And we all know, like on a pedagogical level, we want to have great interviews. We want to make great connections. But one of the things that always impacts sort of your confidence in your podcast or your listenership is sound quality. If the sound quality is not good, you're not going to attract viewers, and you're not going to feel great about your content. I know Pav and I always joke about erasing the first 17 because when you go back, the sound's just not quite right. And so when you sort of keep that as an initial target, I want to make sure I've got a quality sound. Then you've got to ask yourself, what pieces do I have? What pieces do I want to invest in? You can get quality sound recording on your phone. A couple of great tips: you can put a sock over top and then turn the mic away from you. And if you're just recording like an interlude, you can get a really nice quality sound on your Anchor on your phone. So you don't have to dive in and spend tons of dollars right away to get quality sound. But if you want to do interviews, then you have to modify your space. You have to be really mindful, small, tight space, and then you can really get that great sound. And then if you feel really comfortable, or if you're lucky, you're working with a school or a district or a partnership, and they've given you a nice, lovely roadcaster, often you don't need to worry about your environment as much. But I would always say fixate on making sure you get a nice quality sound, so when you're listening it back, you get a nice listening experience, and other people that are listening are getting a nice listening experience. Because you could bring on the greatest person in the world like Pav Wander, and if it doesn't sound great, then people aren't going to come back because people just want to have a nice listening experience. And if I go 1 second longer, I know that's our biggest issue with the Drive, Voice Ed Radio. It's not about can we produce a good show. It's like if we drop off the internet, no one's going to come back because people just get frustrated with you dropping off the internet. Even if you're producing the greatest content, people want those simplicities, a nice listening experience with no drop-offs.
Wow. Okay. We're done. Thank you for coming. Oh, goodness. Okay, so Pav, what's your take? What's your perspective on just the format and figuring out the getting started, the jump off point, looking back? Because Chey said, if you could erase the first 17, but oh my goodness, like Charles said, and I know I talked to you guys when I was getting started, you become mentors and role models in this evolving process. And if you were to tell Charles now, listen to episode 54 and listen to episode 1 and make the comparison. So have that grace with yourself. So Pav, those first 17 episodes, what are your thoughts, and how do you look at coming into podcasting?
Sorry about that. So something that Chey and I really have with one another is balance. So we balance each other out really well. And as much as Chey really hates those first 17 episodes, I find them a little difficult to listen to as well, just because we've come such a long way from there. But it really gives you that opportunity to track your growth. And boy, have we grown, and anyone will. So Charles, you take a look at your podcast, and Traci, you take a look at yours. Undoubtedly, you have grown from episode 1 to episode wherever you are at. So yes, the technical things do matter, but you will pick them up as you go. You will find, you will listen back to your episodes, your 1, 2, 3, 4, and you will say to yourself, where can I do better? And this is the beauty of working with something that you are passionate about. So you will always want to better yourself. And that's part of the process. And this is part of why we are doing this in the first place. We want to better ourselves as teachers. We want to better ourselves as educators. We want to better ourselves as podcasters. So something that has really helped us is connecting with other podcasters in so many different areas on Twitter, on Voxer. We've connected with so many podcasters. We've engaged with their podcast. Just like Charles mentioned, you listen to so many, and that really helped you to figure out what the format is of your own. So Chey and I went a little bit of a different. I know you want to jump in. Just wait. I'm not done. So there, we kind of took a look at all of the different podcasts, and we started with the reflection. We started with, what do we ultimately want to do? We want to talk to people about the same things that we've been talking to each other about every Friday at the end of a work week. We want to reflect. We want to talk about, hey, this is what I tried in my class. What did you try in your class? Was it similar? Was it different? What worked well? What will I try next week? And we found people really wanted to engage with us in that realm as well when we reached out on social media. So people have a desire in education to learn from other educators. And so it was in that we really were like, okay, this is sort of working for us. This is going well. And then to build on top of that, we were connecting with so many educators. We felt like we needed to feature them. So we have something that's a little bit different. We don't do an interview, but we have a segment in our podcast called 3 Enlightened Minutes, where we feature an educator that we have met on social media. We've come across their work. We've reached out to them and said, hey, we really dig what you're doing. We know that you have a great passion, and we'd love to have you feature that on our podcast, just so other people can get to know you and what you're all about. And so it was a little bit different than the interview style, but we wanted to be able to feature some of these people that we were coming across, and it worked out really well for us. So we love that. It's a little bit different, but you got to go with what works for you and what your passion is.
So, Charles, before we get to our second question, real quick, what would you say the biggest challenge you had to getting started? What do you think your biggest challenge was?
I think the world of podcasting is so large, it's overwhelming, right? It's kind of like, where do I start? And if you join any of the forums or any place else, it's kind of like everybody's talking about different things. Like, well, and we were just talking about this last night, right? Do we do transcripts? Do we focus on microphones? Do I got to have an elaborate setup, right? So I think it's right, starting simple and trying to figure out what is it that you want to do, and then just getting started, right? You always have room to grow. And that's, I know for me, I think I'm in 33 episodes. And by the way, Chey, Pav, my very first recording was your 3 Enlightened Minutes. So appreciate that. But yeah, just, I've been growing, right? And you find something and just grow and move on from there. But just definitely get started. Don't sit there and try to figure it all out in the beginning before you get started, because if you do that, you will never start. So just get started.
Guys, if you don't remember anything else tonight, lock that in. Just get started. Don't let anything hold you back. I got to have everything. I got to have lights. Just get started. All right. Speaking of starting, let's start taking a look at question number 2, which comes from an elementary principal. Let's see what he has to say, and let's get back to it.
Can you share with me how you go about planning your podcast? How do you determine the topic? How do you get your guest? And more broadly, how do you decide the ideal length? Who your target audience is and how often do you record?
Whoa, y'all ready to dive in? All right, so Chey, why don't you jump in first? Talk to us about just that. I feel like we've talked on a high level about planning, but let's say we have our podcast. And before we even do that, let's back up just a quick little bit. Share about hosting, a piece about hosting, then take us into the planning aspect.
As that question was coming about, I was actually thinking, and my thought diverted, and it actually was still in combination with Charles' comment. And when you're sort of thinking you're planning, I would always advocate listen to your own podcast back to get your own real sense of how your content's coming across. No, I'm not narcissistic. I just want to hear my craft. And so when you record a podcast, Pav and I have often joked that we got to come back and listen. And there are some, Pav will know that I'm not listening anymore. I've had it. We got to get better for next week. And so I would suggest do listen to yourself. I picked up right away how often I repeat myself by listening to your podcast. So I would just piggyback on Charles, and then that next comment about length, all these things, you do have to pick goals, and you really have to make them ascend. You really have to know what's your main goal that's most important to you. So are you podcasting to archive your thoughts so that in 2 years you can go back and say, this is where I am? Or are you podcasting, say, in the role of administrator and you want to have something for parents? Or are you podcasting as sort of the role of like making a newsletter for your community? Pav and I, it took us a little while to fixate, like, I'd like to say, oh, it's a podcast for educators. But really, Pav and I are just two teachers, or we're two teachers, depending on whether the word just gets you upset. But we like to fixate, because we associate and connect with being teachers, we decide our podcast is for teachers, by teachers, because we're not learning coaches, we're not administrators, so we're not going to talk on something that we can't really have an anecdotal experience to share. And so in those regards, like, how do we plan? Well, we fixate on our mission, which is we really feel like we are teachers talking teaching and an advocate for teachers' voice, and then everything based on that primary goal just seems to fit in place. Some weeks better than others. Sometimes it's natural to know what you want to talk about, and other weeks Pav and I will go, what's going on, what's cutting edge in your classroom? So having that, your goals, and really ascending them, and then making sure whatever I'm doing, how does it target with my number one goal? And hopefully the trickle effect will take care of those rest of them. But you have to find what your goal is.
Wow. We've guys, these nuggets that we're sharing. Oh my goodness. Just start figuring out your main goal. Pav, take us into, if you have something to add to that, but also take us into, we've got the goal. What about topics?
So yeah, that's a really good one. In the beginning, it was very much reflective, and it was talking about, sort of the things that we were doing in our spaces. Once in a while, we would come across a really great article. Just anywhere. Like, we use Flipboard to kind of curate some of the things that we might be interested in learning about. And so education is one of the topics. We have some great articles that come through Flipboard, or sometimes even on Twitter. Somebody will share a really great article. We follow Edutopia and all of these great places where there's lots of articles being posted. And we would come across something like helicopter teaching that came about from an article that we came across, and we did a really great podcast episode on what is helicopter teaching and how does it apply in our spaces. Are we helicopter teachers? Have we ever been? It caused us to reflect on our practice, and it made us much more conscientious of how we are as educators, and then going forward, more mindful about our actions in our classroom. And so, whether it's intentional or not, even just knowing that this is something that exists has altered our practice. And so, this is what we now strive for. Sometimes we will come across an article that we want to talk about, a new pedagogy that somebody is trying out. There's all kinds of new tech resources that we are being exposed to. We'd like to sometimes take one of those, try it in our classroom, and then reflect on it. And then, was it something that worked for our spaces? Was it something that we would likely try again? Is this something that's going to transform our practice? These are all things that we then work into our program. So we take influence from a lot of different places, and then even trending topics. We did an episode a couple of weeks ago on toxic positivity, and it was one of our, he's cringing over there. It was one of our most talked about episodes because this is a trending topic, and whether you know what it is or you don't know what it is, it's intriguing. And so we take some of those trending topics, we break them down, we really, we will research, we will find articles to support, we will find other resources to support, we will talk to people who know a little bit more about this than we might know about it, and then we all bring it into the mix with our own reflections in there as well, because Chey and I have differing perspectives on things. And so we can bring a little bit of one perspective versus another perspective. And then as a listener, whether you want to or not, you're learning from one of us. You're taking something in that you didn't enter with. And so, no, stop it. Stop. so yeah, it's, there's so much direction and there's so much influence, and we really like to pull from every place that we possibly can.
I love the piece about, being analytical about our practice and reflecting, and then having that dialogue and encouraging listeners, challenging listeners to dive deeper into their own practice in a reflective manner. That's powerful. So if you haven't subscribed to Staff Room Podcast, what are you waiting on? That was pretty bold, right? Yeah, but what are you waiting on? All right, Charles, listen, jump us off with guests, no guests, some guests. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so you know what? I try to have a little bit of both, right? So every other episode, so there's one with guest, and then there's one that's just my thoughts, right? And so I've tried to create a podcast that appeals to all different types of listeners, right? The pause to ponder episodes are short, right? 10, 15 minutes maximum, right? Short, just quick reflections, right? But the regular episodes are where I bring guests in, and they can range anywhere between 30 minutes to an hour, right? And so I try to find my guests, and to be honest, I'm looking for passionate educators, period, right? Yes, it's great to have some of those big names in education because there's an appeal to that, right? Big names come with big groups, right? Big groups equal listeners, and obviously that helps out your podcast, right? But the truth is there are many educators out there that don't have platforms, don't have spaces to get their voices heard, right? So we want to make sure that we're giving them a space, right? I remember I did one with one of my guests. I'm not going to throw her out there, but even after the recording, she contacted me and said, no, do not release it. I hated how I sounded. I said, I'll tell you what, let me put everything together. I'll share it with you. I'll let you know when it's your time, and then you let me know. And so I let it, her marinate in that for a little bit. And when it came time, she said, no, go ahead and release that, right? And she was so excited that she finally had a platform to get that voice out there. And so I try to find both of those, right? There are individuals who will contact me and say, I want to be on your show. And I don't have this elaborate, well, let's sit down and have a conversation. Let me see if you're good enough to be on there, right? It's just, are you passionate about what we're doing? And do you agree with the philosophy that we're bringing? And if you are, then let's have just an organic conversation. So it's pretty simple.
Awesome. I love the lack of rigidity and structure. And what I mean by that is open to others. It's not about numbers. That's not what education is about. And we've said so much how we share and learn and grow from each other, with each other. So it can't be getting the big names. It's got to be giving people that voice and that platform. So, and I think that's what we all are really passionate about is the heart of the educator, the new educator, like they need a voice. I celebrate all of that. Chey, talk to us about length and frequency. Let's hit both of those.
I just made a podcasting faux pas. Length is one we have dabbled with, and we've probably had a workaround by engaging in so many different styles of show to hit different lengths. So like Charles, we used to have an interlude where Pat would do an interlude, I would do an interlude, like 7 to 12 minutes. And then we would then go in and we've done our author talk. So we aim for about 20 minutes. And then we have our radio show where we're aiming for an hour, hour and a half. And in our podcast, we've had a lot of rich debate. And so a lot of people say aim for around 30 minutes because that's the average commuter time. So if you're a baseball analytics guy, like that's your hot number. If people are driving for 30 minutes, then let's hit a podcast that's 30 minutes. But I think we all know Stephen Hurley, who is just one of the most kindest, most gentle podcasting gurus who just wants to help people out. And he's helped us out on two fronts. And he just said, people listen to podcasts in sections. So it says you let the conversation go. If it's an hour and 10 minutes and it's rich dialogue, they may not listen to an hour and 10 minutes, but they're going to come back. And another thing, because you know what, Charles, you talked about this, the podcast industry is saturated. There's so many podcasts. And as much as it's not about numbers, but you want to feel like your voice is reaching some people. And I emphasize reach because Stephen Hurley talked a lot about with us on the Drive radio show. He goes, we don't worry about numbers. It's about how far can your stories reach out and how far are you connecting with people to share those stories. And when you talk about that diversity and connecting with people, sometimes we think we're growing, but we're actually just becoming more and more exclusive. But we really want to grow and connect with reach because we want to touch stories and hear stories from people in areas that maybe we wouldn't have. And so when Stephen Hurley said that word to me, we just worry about reach. If we're reaching and connecting with people from afar, then that's something. So those would be my little nuggets of knowledge passed on to me that I would share here.
Thanks for that information. I ditto Stephen Hurley. I call him the Podfather. Like he is just such a support, a mentor, role model, all of those things. I want to add one thing that might really help listeners. It's something I do. And I looked down a minute ago to see if I have it with me, and I don't. It's downstairs. But I have a journal. I have a podcast journal that I take notes on all of my episodes. It helps me kind of keep track of where I am. If the music I'm dropping in, and then I put a date. So it's almost like a journal. It's a diary almost of the podcast. So that's a really good piece. And especially, if you're look at the content that you're really passionate about, you might want to go deeper in that. So you can look back in the journal and pull from that. Charles, Pav, take us through before we get ready to close out. And this time goes so quickly. It's like, where did time go? And Chey will come to you right after that. Big oops that you've had, because we've all had them, right? Like an oops, like
don't say your co-host. Don't say your co-host. Don't.
No, that's definitely not an oops. I think that we have some great back and forth with one another, and I like the perspectives that we offer each other. Big oops. We've had a few moments where things have not gone our way, but I can't think of any oops because we work through our oops pretty well. We hit challenges, and we've had a lot of different challenges that have occurred in the entire process, but we found our ways to work around. Like with the drive, we were having a lot of issues staying connected, and we figured out what the variable, we actually isolated every variable and we corrected every variable. So these are things that come with time. I don't know that we have any oops. I did want to highlight one thing just in regards, Chey has one, and we'll get to that. I did want to highlight one thing that you were saying, Traci, about the journal. The journal does really help you archive. Whether you ever release your podcast or not, your podcast recordings are an archive of your teaching at the moment. And this is something that Chey and I have said over and over and over again. You're recording it. This is who you were as a teacher at this time. So when you go back at the end of your career, and you go back and you listen to this is who you were as an educator. And I think just that alone is important enough of a reason to start something up, whether it's a journal, a blog, a vlog, a podcast, whatever it is. Archive your voice. It's so important.
Ooh, I love that. Archive your voice. We could stop right there. Okay, Charles, Chey, give us an oops, and then we got to go.
So, one of the things that I was told when I first started was to make sure that you have enough episodes, right? In case you don't have a guest, you always have that consistency going, right? If you have a podcast dropping every week, keep that podcast dropping every week or whatever your frequency is, right? So in the beginning of my podcast, I was so gung-ho and so excited. I just started recording session after session, session after session. Well, the problem with that was that my podcast, I only had 2 guests a month, right? So it got to a point where we're talking or a podcast is released and it is from 4, 5, 6 months ago, right? And so now we're talking about relevancy, right? So you want to make sure that the content of your show is still relevant, right? If we're talking in, September about the school year wrapping up from last year, people are like, wait, what? Right? So that was one of my big oops, was to slow it down and to make sure that my episodes are relevant and timely.
Slow it down. I like that. Chey, what's up?
I was going to say, Charles, that's a lot of advice we get is have a bank. But once you build too big a bank, then you almost feel like you're not honoring the episode by not keeping it current. So that was a great one. I'm going to give you a little silly one, which is one of the reasons I can't stand the first 17 episodes, because we were recording off our computer and we had a couple of snowballs and we secured the space pretty well. But I don't know if Pav wore a lot of jewelry, but I know I wore a lot of jewelry, and I would listen to it and I would keep hearing my chains were always in the episode. So I'm just like, and then I would stop even listening to my content. Like, there's my jewelry again. There's my jewelry again. There's my jewelry again. So we'd record. I'd stop and I'd be taking off my braces and I'd take off all my chains and said, now we can record.
So much jewelry.
It's that Mr. T costume.
Yes. Tracy, give us something of yours. You've curated such a great conversation, but we know you have so many gems. I don't think we've heard quite enough from you. So give us one to wrap this up. Leave us with one of your oops or just any podcasting insight to round out tonight's conversation.
My oops is the evolving process of my podcast. It started out just me. Then I got this amazing idea to have themes each day and have guests. Love that. Getting the guests and staying ahead, a little bit challenging to manage. So I was like, oops. So I kind of pulled back a little bit with guests because my podcast literally is like 5 days a week. Then I changed the hosting platform and I researched and I was intimidated and I was scared and I was nervous. And that took a long time. Like, I kind of was like, oh my gosh, I can't do this. Like, after the podcast was up and running and I changed the background, I'm like, oh, Steven, I can't do it. But I knew it was something I wanted to do. So I pushed and pushed and pushed. And I'll be honest, it took a few months. So Intelligogy was kind of offline for a few months, but there was so much work going on in the background. I'm so proud of what I accomplished, the knowledge I have. I'm thankful we all have talked before and talked through some things. Stephen Hurley has guided me. So I've grown because of my oopses. And I would say I'll leave you with don't give up. Don't give up. When things get hard, when you fail, get back up, keep going. On that note, friends, gosh, I'd like to thank Charles Williams, our guest. I hope you had an amazing time hanging out with us, Charles. Make sure you download and subscribe to The Counter Narrative. You know our great friends, Chey and Pav. We just love them so much. Thanks for being here at Staff Room Podcast and The Drive. And me, your guest host. Well, not guest host. Okay, whatever. And me, your host, Intelligogy The Podcast, Traci Browder. Hey, guys, make sure you come back one more time as we close out, listen to my words, close out 2020. We have one last time that we come together, December 22nd. We'll see you then. Thanks for hanging out at Office Hours.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, guys.
Thank you for watching Office Hours presented by School Rubric. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel where we highlight voices and perspectives of educational leaders across the globe. To stay in the know with our latest upcoming panels, interviews, tutorials, and more, make sure that you follow us on social media or visit us at schoolrubric.com. Thank you.